at 6:42 a.m. on October 19, 1944. In the shattered outskirts of Aachen, Private First Class Daniel Reilly pressed his cheek against the cold stone of a collapsed factory wall. A thick blanket of morning fog smothered the ruins, turning every destroyed window frame into a blackened mouth, every alleyway into a tunnel of smoke-stained gray. Somewhere ahead, Reilly couldn't see exactly where, a German marksman had pinned down an entire American platoon for 13 hours, killing 7 men and wounding 4 more. No one could spot the shooter. No muzzle flash. No movement. Nothing but the crisp, flat crack of a car 98K drifting through the fog like a voice with no body. Reilly listened. That was the only advantage he had. Before the war, he'd tuned pianos in Brooklyn, a job that trained him to recognize the faintest changes in pitch, vibration, and resonance. Now, lying in rubble with mortar dust in his hair, he listened not for the shot, but for the after of the shot. The echo, the delay, the slight metallic ring that didn't match brick or stone. He wasn't guessing. He was building a map in his head. He exhaled slowly. He was about to take a shot no sniper could justify because he wasn't aiming at where the German was. He was aiming at where the sound said the German had to be. Daniel Reilly hadn't grown up dreaming of firing a rifle. He grew up tuning strings in a cramped piano shop on Flatbush Avenue, listening to the way sound traveled through wood, metal, and empty space. His father had taught him to hear not the note itself, but the imperfections around it, the faint buzz of a loose plate, the subtle warble of a stretched wire, the difference between a clean strike and one dampened by dust. By 16, he could walk into a room and tell which floorboards were hollow just by clapping once. His draft notice arrived in 1943, and the Army quickly discovered his eye was average, his trigger pull decent, but his hearing and sense of resonance were exceptional. During training, instructors noticed he could identify the direction of machine gun fire faster than the rest of the platoon. When other men flinched, he tilted his head, analyzing. He wasn't assigned as a sniper. Reilly lacked the traditional background, but when his unit reached France in the summer of 1944, his unusual gift started saving lives. In ruined villages, he warned squads about snipers, hidden behind walls, by recognizing the pitch difference between a stone facade and corrugated metal. In dense forests, he could tell whether an enemy was reloading by the subtle shift in echo cadence after each shot. The men trusted him. Officers didn't understand him. Reilly didn't blame them. Piano tuners weren't supposed to hear war this clearly, and no manual taught what resonance could reveal. But by the time they reached Aachen, nobody questioned him when he said, "I hear him. I can find him." The problem in Aachen wasn't just the sniper's accuracy, it was the terrain itself. The industrial district had been pulverized by weeks of shelling, leaving behind jagged foundations, twisted beams, and half-collapsed warehouses that created hundreds of hiding spots. Fog rolled in each morning from the river and clung stubbornly to the ruins, turning visibility into a guessing game. The German marksman had chosen his nest perfectly. No line of sight from the American positions, no silhouette to catch, and no exposed approach that didn't cross the kill zone. Every attempt to locate him had failed. A scout team tried circling behind the rubble pile where the shots seemed to originate. The sniper dropped the lead man with a single round the moment he rose to his knees. A lieutenant ordered suppressive fire into the factory loft windows after 2 full belts of .30 caliber. Nothing changed except the fog turning gray with dust. Even artillery hadn't helped. 3 rounds fell short, 1 overshot, and the sniper simply shifted a few feet deeper into cover. The pattern was too precise to be luck. He fired exactly 1 shot every 7 to 10 minutes, enough to hold the Americans in place, but not enough to reveal his rhythm. The men trapped behind the overturned truck had counted the intervals and knew they couldn't run for cover without being picked off. Reilly studied the ruined factory in front of them, but fog swallowed its shape. No sight lines, no angles, no shadows. There was nothing to aim at. Yet each rifle crack carried clues no one else could hear. The faint metallic afterring indicating steel instead of stone. The stretched echo that suggested height. the tiny delay before the echo bounced again off a distant brick wall. To everyone else it was chaos. To Reilly it was data. And somewhere inside that shifting, ghostly soundscape was the exact point where the German had to be hiding. Reilly waited for the next shot. Not taking cover like the others, but tilting his head slightly, letting the sound wash through him the way he once listened for a piano's false tone. When the rifle cracked, sharp and flat, he didn't react to the danger, he reacted to the echo. The first reflection came back fast and thin, meaning the sniper was firing from a spot backed by metal, not masonry. A fraction of a second later came a second echo, deeper and slower, bouncing off a far wall at least 30 yards behind the first surface. That meant depth in interior space, not an open perch. Then faintest of all, a third reflection, a shallow, fluttering resonance he recognized instantly. Corrugated steel. A warehouse roof panel vibrating from the shot. Reilly's mind assembled the space like a schematic. The sniper wasn't in the main lofts or the office windows or the debris piles where everyone assumed. He was inside a collapsed loading bay, crushed on one side by bombing, its metal roof half-caved, forming a narrow overhead pocket. The fog had turned the opening invisible, but the echoes betrayed its shape, a shallow metal canopy with one intact steel support beam. The German would be prone beneath it, shielded from sight, firing through a long, jagged tear in the sheet metal. No one else knew that pocket existed. No one could even see it. Reilly crawled to the lieutenant and whispered what he'd heard. The officer frowned, unconvinced. "You're telling me you know where he is because of vibrations?" Reilly nodded. "Sir, that bay roof rings. Steel hums differently than stone. He's under a metal canopy 12, maybe 15 feet back from the opening." The lieutenant stared at him. "There is no opening." Reilly pointed. "There is. You just can't see it." The lieutenant hesitated, torn between disbelief and desperation. Another rifle shot cracked. Another man screamed. Finally he said, "All right, Reilly. Show me." Reilly didn't lead the lieutenant forward. He led him sideways, crawling along the rubble until they reached a low ridge of shattered bricks that gave them a slight elevation advantage. Through the drifting fog, the factory ruins looked like nothing but broken steel and collapsed walls. But Reilly wasn't looking for shapes. He was listening for the faint that metal gives off after being struck by vibration. When the next rifle shot cracked through the mist, Reilly pressed his palm to a fractured concrete slab and felt the tremor run through it like a weak heartbeat before fading unevenly. Proof the sniper wasn't firing straight ahead, but from a shallow angle to the right. He shifted a few feet, then a few more, chasing the subtle changes in echo pitch until the reflections lined up perfectly with the vibrations he'd memorized. Finally, he pointed into a seemingly empty patch of fog and twisted steel. "There," he whispered. The lieutenant narrowed his eyes, seeing nothing but the collapsed loading bay swallowed by smoke and mist. Reilly tapped the air with 2 fingers. "He's underneath the metal canopy. There's a tear in the sheet. He's firing through it." As if to prove him right, a faint metallic flutter quivered across the air, nearly lost beneath the wind. "That's the steel panel vibrating from his muzzle blast," Reilly murmured. "He's lying prone behind the rip, invisible from the front." The lieutenant shook his head. "Even if that's true, no one can make that shot. You can't see him." Reilly slid his rifle into place, adjusting his angle by instinct. "I'm not aiming at him," he said calmly. "I'm aiming at the point where the resonance converges." The lieutenant stared. "Reilly, if you miss, he'll kill you." Reilly settled the stock into his shoulder, breath steady. "Then I won't miss." Reilly waited for the next shot, not with fear, but with focus so sharp it felt like the world had narrowed to a single trembling line between him and the unseen German. When the K98K cracked again, the metal canopy shivered with that same thin, vibrating flutter, and Reilly caught the exact pitch he'd been chasing. He shifted his aim an inch to the left, another half-inch up, placing his crosshair not on a target but on the invisible space where the sound met the steel. He exhaled, letting the cold tighten his lungs, and fired. His rifle's report echoed across the ruins. Then the valley went eerily still. No answering shot. No movement. Even the fog seemed to freeze. Reilly held position, counting the seconds. At 27, the lieutenant whispered, "Did you?" but fell silent as a distant clatter broke through the quiet. Metal shifting, something collapsing. Then a helmet rolled out from beneath the crushed bay, followed by the limp shoulder of a man who'd been hidden in darkness all morning. The German sniper slid fully into view, motionless. Reilly lowered his rifle slowly, his heartbeat finally catching up to him. He hadn't just fired at an enemy he couldn't see, he'd fired at a sound. And the sound had told him the truth. The lieutenant stared at the dead sniper as if struggling to accept what he was seeing, then turned to Reilly with an expression caught between disbelief and awe. Word spread fast, first among the men pinned behind the overturned truck, then through the entire platoon. By the time they secured the sector an hour later, soldiers from 2 neighboring companies were already asking, "How the hell did you find him in that fog?" Reilly tried to wave them off, insisting it was luck, but the lieutenant corrected him quietly. He heard the bastard. Heard him like a tuning fork. That was all it took. Men began asking Reilly to explain what he'd listened for, how he'd known the difference between brick echo and steel resonance, why he'd chosen that exact angle. He demonstrated by tapping rifle barrels against debris, pointing out how metal vibrated distinctly compared to shattered stone. Some understood immediately. Others tried and failed, but even they began noticing things they never had before, the way ruins carried sound, how fog dampened certain frequencies, how distance could be guessed by the decay of a reflection. Within 2 days, squad leaders were asking Reilly to listen ahead before pushing into new streets. When another unseen German fired from a warehouse across the river, 3 men instinctively looked to Reilly instead of their officers. He didn't claim expertise, but he crouched, listened, and directed fire to a blind angle that flushed the shooter from cover. Rumors grew. Some said he could hear through walls. Others claimed he could sense the exact moment before a sniper fired. Reilly hated the exaggerations, but he couldn't deny the pattern. Soldiers were adapting to what he'd shown them, passing the technique down in hurried whispers, using sound to survive terrain so shattered that sight meant nothing. No manuals, no orders, just men learning from another man because, for the first time in weeks, they had a way to fight back against the invisible. Higher command never heard the story the way the enlisted men told it. When the battalion staff reviewed the sudden drop in sniper attacks around the Aachen sector, they credited it to improved patrol discipline, better use of smoke, even weather conditions favorable to visibility. Nothing in the after-action reports mentioned resonance, reflections, or a private first class who could read echoes like sheet music. The lieutenant who'd witnessed the shot left it out on purpose. He knew what would happen if officers tried to formalize something so delicate. They would turn it into a requirement, force screen replacements to attempt echo-based targeting under fire, and get good men killed trying to copy what they didn't understand. So the official story became simple. The German sniper made a mistake and exposed himself. End of note. When a regimental intelligence officer asked how the platoon located the shooter, the lieutenant responded with a straight face, "We got lucky." Reilly stood beside him and said nothing. He didn't need recognition, and the truth wouldn't survive the paperwork anyway. Rumors persisted among the enlisted ranks, but on maps, in logs, and informal records, Reilly's name disappeared into the same fog that had covered the battlefield. The army moved on, chalking the success up to ordinary tactics, never realizing they'd witnessed the first battlefield use of a technique that didn't yet have a name. In the months that followed, the front pushed deeper into Germany, and units rotated in and out of ruined towns where visibility vanished behind smoke, dust, or morning fog. As new soldiers arrived, they picked up habits from veterans who had served at Aachen, tapping beams before entering buildings, listening for echo decay in alleyways, using sound to judge depth and angle when sight betrayed them. Nobody called it a method, and nobody traced it back to Reilly, But the principles spread quietly through squads the way practical knowledge always does in war. When artillery teams began experimenting with makeshift sound ranging, placing canteens, helmets, or ration tins on the ground to detect vibrations, officers praised their ingenuity without realizing they were borrowing from something Reilly had demonstrated by instinct. Months later, engineers studying urban combat patterns noted that infantry had become unexpectedly proficient at detecting concealed enemy positions using acoustic cues, though they attributed this to experience, not innovation. After the war, military researchers developing early acoustic location devices discovered that field reports from late 1944 described resonance behaviors and reflection intervals matching their new mathematical models. None mentioned the soldier who first recognized those clues in real time. Reilly's insight had dissolved into doctrine, absorbed without credit, shaping the foundations of post-war sound detection technology. By the time modern armies began teaching structural acoustics as a formal field skill, the lineage was buried under layers of terminology and official language. The idea remained, but the man behind it faded into history. Known only to the few who had watched him aim at a sound and change the course of a fight, Daniel Reilly returned to Brooklyn in late 1945 with his hearing slightly damaged. His hands still steady, and no one outside his platoon aware of what he'd done. He went back to tuning pianos, slipping easily into the quiet life he'd left behind. Customers noticed he worked slower than he used to, listening longer to each string, tapping the wood with a gentleness that suggested he was hearing more than sound. He never mentioned the war unless someone asked, and even then he spoke only of the places he'd seen, not the things he'd done. His medals went into a drawer. The army never recorded his role in Aachen, and he didn't bother correcting them. He married, raised a daughter, and spent decades restoring old instruments across New York. Known locally as the tuner who could bring life back into pianos others considered hopeless. When he died in 1987, his family boxed up his tools and notebooks. One of them, a small field-worn journal, ended up in a donation pile at a music shop. Years later, a historian researching urban combat acoustics found it and recognized the sketches inside drawings of echo intervals, notes about metal resonance, diagrams of ruined structures annotated with sound reflections. It matched early post-war acoustic location theory almost perfectly. For the first time, someone connected the contributions of an unknown piano tuner to battlefield science. But by then, Reilly's daughter was gone, and no relatives remained to hear the story. His name never reached textbooks or military doctrine. Yet a fragment of him survived every time a soldier listened to a building, a wall, or a street and understood what sound could reveal. His grave sits near the edge of Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. A simple marble headstone softened by decades of rain and lichen. It records only his name, rank, and service dates, no mention of Aachen. No hint that a single shot he took in the fog reshaped how soldiers interpret sound on the battlefield. On Memorial Day, an occasional stranger leaves a small flag, unaware of the story buried with him. To most who pass by, he is just another soldier among thousands, one more life folded into the vast anonymous weight of the war. Yet somewhere, in the archives tucked inside a footnote of a footnote, are the fragments he left behind, the journal pages of resonance sketches, the forgotten after-action anomalies, the quiet testimonies of men who swore he heard the battle the way a musician hears a symphony. Reilly never sought recognition, and history never offered it. But the truth endures in the skill he pioneered, the idea that even in the chaos of war, sound can reveal what sight cannot. And though no official monument bears his name, every soldier who listens for echoes in broken streets is unknowingly carrying forward the legacy of a man who once aimed at nothing he could see and struck precisely what he knew was there.